Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais in Ontario, Canada, and it's a sunny Ontario after the unseasonal snow on Monday with episode number 16 of the Yakking podcast, where we talk about life, business, and more. And we bring you tips and ideas for a changing world, and the world is certainly changing today. As usual, we have another interesting guest, but first let me welcome my co-host, the beauty part of Beauty and the Beast, and she will introduce our guest. Over to you. How are you doing there, Kathleen?
I'm well. Thank you very much, Peter. Hello and welcome, everyone. Great to have you with us. And thank you again for tuning in. And we do have a special guest with us today. His name is, I hope I get this right, Anthony Raymond Michalski.
Perfect.
And Anthony, I'm going to push it over to you to just tell our viewers and our listeners exactly who you are and what you do.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. And thank you, Peter. My name is Anthony, and I'm a publisher. I own a company called Callisti Publishing, and I publish personal development books and inspirational books, and like I like to say, life-amplifying books. And so throughout the years, other than publishing books and before that being in sundry businesses, I also do some publishing services. I do editing and design, and so there's always books.
That's really good. And Anthony, a couple of our previous guests know you well, and Nancy Lou Henderson and Chuck Bartok,
Yes.
and I think Lou McIntyre, who we had on earlier this week, and we're about to publish his and Karen's video. And they speak very highly of you. So when Nancy said, this is an interesting guy you should have on your show, we thought we better take her up on that. So.
Nancy's a sweetheart, and her book is doing, it's really a heartfelt book.
Oh, yeah.
Or actually series of books. And she's a real go-getter, and she's someone who exemplifies what can happen in the self-publishing field and in the self-publishing market when someone has an idea, has a passion, and more importantly has a follow-through. And you know, she follows Chuck Bartok's advice, who is a master marketer and a master businessman. And she's going gangbusters from what I understand. And yeah, she's a very wonderful person.
So Anthony, tell us, what started you off as a book publisher?
God, I have a joke, but I've stopped myself from saying that joke. So I'll just say I've had a lifelong affair with books. From my earliest age, I was seldom without a book. From reading A. Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, to at one point I was interested in World War II. Of course, growing up in the 70s and 80s, those were always, fairly big topics. So I was without a book, and then I matriculated, went to Penn State University, and I got out. I was in banking, and then I had another business totally different from books, automotive. Aftermarket automotive body parts and accessories.
Okay.
And then I found a book. Like I said, I've always been reading, and around that time I was reading personal development books as well. You name it, I read it, especially in the 90s, all the big names from Napoleon Hill to the big guy, Tony Robbins at that time. And my business partner had a book on his shelf, a very old book, called The Master Key System by this fellow named Charles F. Hannell. I read it. I liked it. He saw that I liked it so much that he gifted it to me. And so later on down the road, the business partnership was dissolved. I said, I'm going to publish this book because I couldn't find my own copy. Looking at that time, there were tons of bookstores at that time. There was everything from Borders and Barnes and Noble to Walden Greens. So there were a lot, but I couldn't find that book anywhere. And I think this was slightly before Amazon. I think Amazon was founded, 97, 98?
Yeah, in the late 90s, yeah.
Yeah, so it was around that time, but still, the internet wasn't really happening. And actually, because I wanted to publish this book was the reason I got a computer at that time. Now, I was into computers in the 80s, Apple IIs, early Macintoshes. But when I went to college and came back, I wasn't into them so much. But when I decided to publish this book, I went and got a computer and learned as I went. And my first book was really nothing more than a glorified photocopy. I mean, I typeset the book and everything, but it was 8.5 by 11. If you've ever taken a college class where the instructor gives the spiral bound
yes.
syllabus and notes and additional readings, supplementary readings, that was my book. And that's what I sold. That's what started it off. And just because of a plethora of serendipitous events, and a really, really amateur web page, it somehow, like I said, just started selling very well. And then I published a real book, then more real books and real authors. And now I'm in this mess that I am now.
Wow, wonderful. I'm going to throw in a personal question, and it's a fun one.
Please.
Because I was reading your bio, and you had the word that you're an aspiring flaneur, and I thought I knew what the word meant, but I thought, I don't want to embarrass myself. I better check on this. So I looked it up before we got talking, and it says a flaneur is a lounger, a stroller, a loafer, an idle man about town, and it could also be a synonym for boulevardier. So I thought, the little bit I've read about you and heard about you, and now talking to you, there's no way you could be a flaneur. You're far too energetic for that. So how did you come up with that word?
I wish. There are a couple of people that I admire, I watch, but I like, maybe like everyone else, I like to sit around and just think. And sometimes the thinking is better than, actually going out and doing. And people make that mistake of the idea being everything, when and I know, and Kathleen knows that it's the execution that's everything.
Yep.
Better to execute great on a pretty horrible idea than to have a great idea with horrible execution.
Yep.
Sure.
But I always took the word flaneur to be, it does have that connotation of a lounger or an idler, to be bone idle. But I also take it just to mean someone who likes to just sit around, read books, and think. And if I could get that in some way, and in some ways I have, then that'd be fine with me.
Good.
I mean, I don't have to own the world. I just have to own a somewhat comfortable chair and maybe a good audio system for some music, and I'll be okay. And of course, shelves and shelves and shelves
of books,
books.
As we can see. Good philosophy. Probably won't have a heart attack. Over to you, Kathleen.
So, Anthony, is there a difference between an author and a writer? Because I would think we're all writers, but
that's I've worked mostly with authors. Well, actually, no. Now I'm working with mostly, yes. I mostly work with authors and very few writers. And here's the difference. I think anyone can be an author.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyone could write a book, or at least have a book written for them and them be considered the author. I mean, that girl from that horrible TV show, remember the Jersey Shore? There was that kooky, the girl that was on it. I don't know, but she has a book. Everyone has a book. If you get relatively famous enough, you're going to have a book. It's just part of the media package. It's part of the merchandising shelf. But very, very few people are writers. See, writers write. Anyone could be, like I said, anyone could be author of a book, and that's great. And if you're a business person, you might want to have a book, even have a book written for you, just so you can gain that authority, like we all like to say, and have that as part of your media package. But very, very few people are writers. And writers are people who write every day, who they get up and they write. They improve their craft. They look at writing as both the skill and the art, and at times the science that it is. And that's the difference. So if you have an idea for a book, go for it. Run with it. Be an author. But hopefully you become a writer too. And hopefully you go and you read books with that critical eye so that you could discern good writing from bad writing, or what makes something like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451
right.
a really brilliant book. because it's beautifully written. And some popular books, especially more of the modern books, they're not written as well, but they sell big.
Yeah,
and
they do.
You know, we all know what they are. I won't disparage anyone's books.
For sure. It's interesting. A friend of mine gave me a book by G.K. Chesterton. It's a series of short stories about Father Brown, which I'd
Yes.
never read, believe it or not. I've got
Yes,
to the stage and never read.
I just finished that book, The Innocence of Father Brown.
Yeah.
Yes, fantastic book. I was constantly writing quotes from it just because, man, that guy has just a turn of phrase now and then.
Doesn't
that's just fantastic.
But that was written a long time ago, and yet the way his use of words is so good compared to a lot of what we read nowadays. And
yes,
interesting. I really enjoyed reading that one.
Yes.
So picking up on something you just said in response to what Kathleen asked you,
mm-hmm.
How does one actually go about writing a book?
God, I think it's first you have the idea, of course. And what everyone's technique is going to be different. And many writers have written great books on writing. From I think Stephen King has his book.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? I think it's On Writing. The aforementioned Ray Bradbury has his book on writing. So a lot of books out there. I advise authors and writers. And by the way, I specialize in nonfiction books. So this is really specified for the nonfictions, although I'm certainly carries over for fiction writers as well. Start with two and fill in the blanks. If you do that enough times and you have Roman numeral 1, then the capital A, then the number 1, then the little a underneath that, before long, you have a book.
Mm-hmm. And
it's just at that point, fill in the blanks. Now, even going before that, it's important to have that, but it's also important to know your market. For whom are you writing the book? I mean, and then when you start writing the book, especially nowadays, when modern books are more personal, they have that more personal tone. And sometimes that's good, sometimes not so good, mm-hmm. but that's fine. Your book doesn't have to be great. as we said earlier, better have a good book that you market and execute well than a great book that you don't.
Yep.
But when you know your market, when you know how to talk to them, and when you know where you're going with the book, and that outline as a guide, I'm not going to say it writes itself, but it's a strong 70 to 80% there. Because then after that, you go into the editing phase, which to me is the most important
mm-hmm.
part. Because when you're writing the book, I say just throw everything into it. Just about anything that comes to mind. Because then when you get to the editing, that's when you start taking away.
Right.
That's when you start removing things or adding things if need be. And then one of my favorite quotes, it's unattributed as far as I know, but the quote is, "Your garden is not complete until there's nothing left to take from it."
Right.
Meaning, as you prune, as you take away, then you're left with something. I know it's a Zen quote, so I know it's a very probably Japanese
sounds
idea.
like it. Yeah.
So with that minimalist idea, where it's not what you add to it, it's what you take away. And of course, Apple computers, they exemplify that. Especially when Steve Jobs was at the helm, he was famous for, well, okay, what can we take away from it so as not to clutter it? And that's important with books as well, because that's one big mistake I've found that authors make, especially with nonfiction books, is that they like to, what I call, kitchen sink the thing. Meaning they put everything in there. So they have this 300, 400, 500 page volume, and it's just everything in there. And it's like, well, for one thing, it's too much. But another thing, they probably have enough material for a good 3 books in there.
Right.
And in many ways, with being an author, with getting into the book game, in some ways, quantity does override quality. I think it was James Baldwin who said, when he was asked, what he was asked by an author, what should my goal be? James Baldwin answered, a shelf full of books, meaning you should write so that you produce a shelf full of books.
Right.
Because the more hooks you have in the ocean, the more bites you're going to get. The more chances you have at longevity and maybe getting that great book.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering, are there different kinds of publishing?
No, there are in this day and age, yes. We're all familiar with traditional publishing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where you yourself or through an agent, a publisher comes and publishes your work, and they give you an advance and you earn royalties off that book. And that's traditional publishing. The important thing about that every aspiring author, aspiring writer should know is that it should never cost you any money in a traditional setting, and that it's a tough game, especially nowadays. Mm-hmm. Back in I'd say the golden age, in the 80s and in the 90s, and even before then, it was like nothing, $100,000 advances, $50,000 advances for a first-time author.
Wow.
And nowadays it's, and an unknown one, I should specify, but nowadays perhaps not so much. It's a trickier game. But with the advent of ebooks and self-publishing, it really opened up for a lot of, opened up new doors for a lot of people, like Nancy Lou Henderson.
Yeah.
She's self-publishing. And it's a fantastic choice for her because her books I don't think that they would on their own be picked up by a publisher. Okay. And you can get into the reasons for that later on, because it goes on just, author platform. It's not on necessarily the quality of the work. It's just, at this point in time, there's no author platform. It's a not easily definable market. Mm-hmm. So for a publisher to come in and put money and time into it, it wouldn't pay. But for someone who's self-publishing, yeah, absolutely. And now she's doing it, and there's a chance that she might get picked up by a publisher later on down the road.
Once she's got a track record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so self-publishing is this wonderful avenue for a lot of people who don't mind setting themselves up as their own little business entity, for lack of a better term, and either outsourcing everything from editing to cover design to some marketing, or taking some of those jobs and doing it on their lonesome. But then somewhere in the middle, now there's two branches. There's vanity publishing, but there's also something called author subsidized publishing.
Okay. Now,
vanity publishing are these companies and you pay them a bunch of money and you get a book. Now, whether or not they do any editing of it, that's, sometimes a little extra, sometimes included with the package. But that's an option that's sometimes good for some business people. They have a book or a pamphlet and they just want the book out there. They want that authority. And it's something where they're not necessarily concerned with cost per unit or anything. They just want some books to have in the back of the room, use the books as a business card.
Right.
And it works for them. And likewise with that, there's author subsidized publishing, where it's kind of where the publisher and the author meet in the middle and they share the costs of producing this book. And usually with this, because with traditional publishing, first time author, you're probably not going to get much of an advance, and your royalties are going to be in about the 10 to 15% of net revenues range.
Net revenue. Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, you have to sell a lot of books to make some money. Now, when it goes with author subsidized, you're going to see bigger royalty rates, and also probably fluctuating, because until things are paid off and commitments are met, people will make more money per unit on a royalty basis. So yeah, at this point in time, there are a lot of ways to get your book out there, and more important, there are a lot of ways to make money with it. And that's a good thing. On the bad side is that there's a lot of people
That's right.
out there selling books and having great books, and it's a market that's very strange. So unless you're out there hustling and marketing every day, it can get tricky. But
Yes.
it's like I tell authors, if you just sell one book, if you put one book out there, it's an amazing feeling. It's really an accomplishment.
Yeah.
Does an author necessarily need to have an agent?
To get with a traditional publisher, more than likely.
Oh.
And there's a big reason for that is, a lot of traditional publishers, especially the big ones, and they won't accept unsolicited manuscripts because they don't want to run the risk of either getting sued. Like if they publish a book that's similar in any way whatsoever to this manuscript they received, they don't want to run that risk. Also, they also don't want to be inundated.
Sure.
Publishers, before the advent of self-publishing and all the things that we have now, print on demand and everything, they really played the part of almost of a, how could you say, like a watchman at the gate. They were the arbiters of taste and knowledge, and in some ways agents do that with the publishers, although the criteria has changed quite a bit. But so if you're looking to go to a big house, Random House, Hachette, or any of the big ones, chances are you're going to need an agent. The one rule of thumb is never pay an agent upfront money, and the good agents won't ask for upfront money, and they won't charge to read your manuscript. Believe me, if you're good, or if you have a manuscript or a good reference, a good referral, the agent will either accept you or find you. But yes, for the big ones. For a publishing company like my size, no, I don't need you don't need an agent to get through to me, and for many of the smaller ones, you won't need an agent.
Okay.
And of course, with self-publishing, you won't.
Yeah. So just to follow on from that, then, somebody has an idea for a book, and they're not sure about publishing, so they need to run this by a publisher or an agent. Would they go along with just an outline, or do they need to finish the manuscript before they approach the agent or publisher?
That's an interesting situation. I think it's going to depend on what contacts that person has. Okay. That's something where the person, like, let's say they have an expertise in art, and so they want some advance money or something to either go to the Louvre and look at paintings or whatever. So that's something where they might want to explore that. Again, that's going to depend on the person's level of expertise, their connections, and things of that nature. But I would give it a shot, absolutely, whomever the person is, because knock, maybe they'll answer. Run the flagpole, see who salutes.
Right.
The worst thing anyone could say is no.
Sure.
The second worst thing, and probably the better thing, is they'll say no, but show you where you went wrong so you could improve in the future.
Yes.
And of course, the best would say it.
But from a writer's point of view, that's better to be told, no, it's wrong, but go this way, than months down the track and 400 pages written or something.
No, absolutely. And that's, one of the great things about the internet is that it gives people a chance to put up blogs, put some of their material online. There are sundry, and I don't know any offhand of, web forums and websites where authors share their ideas and their manuscripts. Because one of the most important things any aspiring author or writer could do is just get qualified criticism on the work.
Right.
It's one thing, okay, you're going to give your book or your manuscript to your mom. Your mom's going to love it.
Of course.
Okay. You're going to give it to your friends. Now, your friends are going to have one of two categories. You're going to be the ones who are just going to be afraid. Hey, it's great. Good for you. But then you're going to have the other one who's like, it's horrible, just out of the box. But without that qualified criticism, they won't be able to tell you why.
Why? Absolutely. Yeah.
And so when you have that experience where people are reading it and you're getting that qualified criticism, either from readers in your market or fellow authors, people of that nature, then it means something. I mean, if you write a spy novel and people who are buyers of spy novels or romance novels or whatever, and they don't like it, well, if your market doesn't like it, then you have to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And that's very, very important for everyone. And it's just like in business.
Mm-hmm.
You put the idea out there, see how many people are interested in it, and from that you can see, okay, is this a good market? Do I want to do this or not?
Right.
Because a lot of times an agent or even a publisher isn't the best arbiter of that thing. I mean, look at, every author has their story. They sent their manuscript to 20, 30, 40, 50. They newspapered their walls. They wallpapered their walls with rejection letters.
Rejection letters, yeah.
And then they go and they sell 1 million copies, 1 billion copies. And
yep.
It's the nature of the beast. It's the nature of the game. But as the quicker you can find that you have that, what they call that, product market fit, in better stead you'll be. And especially to do what you mentioned earlier, approach an agent and see if you can get some advanced funding or, without writing the whole thing, hey, and that happened with a lot of books. I think that woman who wrote 13 something, but she wrote a book, but it was basically a what they call a listicle, like an article that's a big list of like 13 things like not to do or something like that. But it was such a popular article that she got approached by a publisher and said, hey, we should make this a book. And the book went and sold a lot of copies.
Sold a lot of copies.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Anthony, as a publisher, what is it that you do for the authors that you work with?
Okay. Wow, a lot. The first start off is we give it that critical eye. Okay, so a good example, an author gave me a book, and I said, this is one of those kitchen sink things. This is just too much. So we broke it up into 2 books and then had a 3rd book that went along with it. And so out of that 1 book, he had a series of books. So we approach it with that critical eye. So any publisher should know the market.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing is that we give it the thorough editing. We make sure it has a good design, because an author should, and when it comes to self-publishing, an author should never, ever design their own book cover. I've never seen a good author design book cover. They're good writers. They don't get the design aspect of it, especially when it comes to book covers. And yeah, you could get one on Fiverr. I've seen not horrible ones from Fiverr. But once you start paying, market prices for a very good book cover, and I've seen not very good ones at market prices, but generally they're much better. You see the difference, and it helps sell the book.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially nowadays when all you're seeing is that little thumbnail,
yep.
It better be designed well. So then the publisher after that should also help with setting up the author's platform, helping with the marketing, making sure it gets in on the distribution, so that it's available, if not everywhere, then most places. Then, of course, there are foreign rights and licensing of the rights. And generally, a publisher will take care of that, and should take care of that. And I don't think of anything else. Making sure hopefully making sure that, as I say, all the I's are crossed and the T's are dotted.
Yeah. Wow. I know what you mean about the book cover. My one and only book, which I self-published and I had printed by a printer, and they had on their staff a graphic designer who I paid her to, and she gave me two totally different ideas for book cover. So I then did a survey on LinkedIn and got the preference, and there was an overwhelming preference for one of, and that's the one I went with. So
very good.
There's no way I could have done that myself. It would have been a disaster. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a different way of looking at things. And as I say, a great book cover. See, the problem is a lot of authors want to tell the story on the cover.
On the cover.
And really a book cover, like I say, it shouldn't be, it should show some decollage, but it shouldn't be a tramp.
That's a good one. Okay. We're going to be running out of time in a moment, and I'm going to ask you to tell me in a second how people can contact you. A very quick one that's totally off the book subject, something in your bio that caught my eye: an evangelist for a Disneyland for car lovers. Just take 1 minute and tell us about our listeners about that.
Okay, I like cars, and a car dealership that's local to me, Rayco Eurospec, RaycoEuro.com. If you're in the market for cars, the owner, I was just down there browsing, killing some time, and he approached me with an idea, and I ended up being their evangelist, working on their website and doing their company newsletter.
Right.
And it's a fun little dealership, so it's kind of like what they call them, a little side gig.
Okay.
And so I get to go and sit in Bentleys and Ferraris every now and then.
Nice.
You know what, they say, don't meet your heroes, and believe me, sometimes just don't. I walked in one day and there's a beautiful Ferrari, but it's I know how much trouble they are.
That's a nice side gig. And the what sort of writers, authors would you like to contact you, and how can they contact you?
No, I work primarily with personal development authors, with business people who want to have books, and with inspirational writers. Now, likewise, I also work with just anyone who wants to have their book edited and designed. And I'm setting up another imprint to handle books that aren't personal development or inspirational, and to deal with that. And I should have that up and running in a couple of months. And so that's going to be a big thing, and that's going to be something that's going to work more on the author subsidized model. Okay. But it's going to be a very wonderful situation. Chuck Bartok is going to be involved in one way or another, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Good.
And good for authors. And Callisti Publishing, I said, that's going to be where, like I said, my expertise, which is personal development books, inspirational books, business books. And so for that, I look for authors who are businessmen, people who do speaking engagements, and people who really want to look at having, I should say, that brand, that author brand, that speaker brand, and who either get it or are willing to learn to get it.
Great. And for our viewers will see the caption underneath the screen when they watch this on video, on YouTube, should I say. And so it's callistipublishing.com.
Absolutely. That, or a very easy one that I just bought, I'm very proud of it, is anthonyraymond.com.
Oh, very good. I'll put that on.
Very easy to remember, and
that's great.
Because my problem with Callisti is just that nobody knows how to pronounce it, and it's tough to spell.
and that's another story which we'll get you back to tell that story another time.
Absolutely.
We're running out of time, so thank you very much, Anthony, for coming on our show. Thanks to all our listeners. That's the end of another episode of the Yakking podcast, and we will be back with more. So thank you. Goodbye.